Kaimere is a distant planet. It is defined by waves of life brought from Earth and set free to evolve independently in this new context. The indigenous life of the planet, swarms of microbes called magic by the people who live there, are what harvest Earth organisms and make copies on Kaimere. As the asteroid which concluded the Mesozoic never struck Kaimere, dinosaurs remain the dominant terrestrial megafauna. The harvest from Miocene South America, prompted by the mass extinction of Nicari flora and fauna due to a massive phosphorus runoff, was among the most significant in Kaimere's history. Its conclusion ushered in the Anchored Period, a nearly 5 million year span of ecological stability and prosperity. The sloths were the breakout stars of this harvest, as discussed at the end of November, with around a dozen genera harvested and over 50 descended species scattered throughout the known world and beyond. Terror birds remain firmly established as the vassal predators throughout the lands of the known world, and armadillos and anteaters have high populations of numerous species as well. The mammal predators of this harvest did not have much success, and the last died out at the end of the Anchored Period, when the tilt of the planetary axis sent the southern hemisphere of Kaimere into a cool and dry period. When South American ungulates and large herbivores were largely outcompeted at the end of the Anchored Period, as many forests were overtaken by grassland, and new predators and prey were better adapted to these open spaces, a few species survived the cold years and had tremendous success once Kaimere righted itself and warmed once more. Over these 3 weeks, we will meet a few of these survivors. While the islands of the Free States have many analogues quite familiar to modern humans, the most abundant large animal in their hills and forests is one that has no living relative on Earth. Assembly historians and naturalists from the Great Library variously described them as a camel or strange horse, but it was only after Macrauchenia and other Litopterns were described from Earth's fossil record that naturalists understood just how unique these animals were in a modern context, and just how unremarkable they were in the grand context of South American megafauna. While deer, antelope, cattle, camels, and horses are far more diverse in modern Kaimere, most of those found today are much more recently introduced harvests and have incredibly high species diversity as a result. There are far fewer Litoptern and Troqatul species, but their populations are generally far larger and more stable compared to the more recently harvested large ungulates. Only the giant buffalo herds of the northern Hausa prairie and mammoths of the southern Arabella steppe compared to the population of Troqatuls and Litopterns. In the forests of Arabella and Nicari, Litoptern and Troqatul herds make up a vast majority of mammal herbivores, over half a ton. Most common of these, by a substantial margin, is the Troqatul, or Alsa camelops, with a species in Nicari, the Colline and Free States Islands, Macrauchenia, and forests of Arvel and Nicari. This abundance has made them a defining member of Kaimere's ecosystems. While not as well built for speed or endurance as such ungulates as pronghorns and camels, Troqatul make up for it in agility. They are fast, but many predators have been thwarted in the chase by their ability to make quicker turns without slowing down than analogous herbivores. They are large enough that adults are too large for most agile predators like big cats and common cockatrice to confidently bring down, and faster than young megaraptorids and terror birds to catch if they miss the initial ambush. This mobility also allows them to race through forests, especially open forests, such as Titan Gardens, further robbing ambush bruisers like the fireback of an easy meal. Most predators in their habitat are not fast enough to catch them if they evade the initial ambush, with their great agility enables. They are, of course, not without threat of predation, but their evasive maneuvers are second to none. An excellent respiration, coupled with ultraviolet dampening secretions similar to toxodonts and sloths, further enhances their chances of surviving predation. In the context of an open forest, with plenty of food supporting their herds and bulk of each individual, it's no surprise that they are by far the most abundant mammal, over half a ton, in the known world. Like toxodonts, their diet is flexible enough that they can get by on flora in the Titan Gardens, but they need periodic angiosperm leaves and grasses, so must keep on the move to stop by concentrations of these plants. Massive herds will often migrate either through mountain passes or around the southern mountains to feed on the ample grasses in the summer of Arvel's highlands, then return to the gardens for the rest of the year when the highlands become too cold for their liking. The Nikari species once did the same with the prairies of Nikar, but once these grasses were replaced by housey grass, they instead only feed on grass patches throughout the Titan Gardens, a much less reliable source. In addition to secreting a substance which damages their ultraviolet signature, helpful when their only regular predators are terror birds, cockatrices, and megaraptorans, which are heavily reliant on sight and have color vision which extends into the ultraviolet spectrum, the snout of Troqatul inflate to display of ultraviolet colors. To their own vision and ours, it is seemingly a bright and pleasant purple or blue, but to their predators, it is intense to the point of disorientation, and the Assembly have recorded several instances of cornered Troqatul inflating their snouts and using it as confusion to get away. Little is known of the Nikari species of Alcicamelops. They appear to lead quite similar lives to their Arvelid cousins, though they are much more tropically adapted, with thin and short fur, and generally a more gracile form. In northern Arvel and western Nikar, both species are frequently found together and hybridized, leading to a lot of taxonomic confusion, and some suggesting they might be better identified as a subspecies. The Picardian Troqatul, or Anamotu, is the largest species of Chimeran Litoptern. They came to Picardia during the low sea levels 1.5 million years ago, and have thrived in this habitat. They are the most combative of Troqatul, readily taking the fight to wolves, leopards, Indrakai, and Weochituka. They spend most of their lives in the lowlands, though will often migrate to enjoy the more arid habitat, which is rich in grasses along the southern coast. The arid region of an island that rains most days is still quite lush after all. While Anamotu can get by on horsetails, ferns, and the like, they still need some grass for a healthy diet, and luckily it only takes a few weeks to cross the mountains. There's enough competition from antelope and deer that they rarely linger, preferring to be in the more main forest where they face far less foraging competition, but still visit the grassy hills a few times a year. Up north of the crescent, another Litoptern genus has one living species, the silver or bearded Troqatul, also called Baru by Imperial Common. They spend most of their lives in the highlands of the crescent, descending down to the lowlands and psoritic wetlands in the winter, when the mountains become colder than they prefer. The name Troqatul specifically applies to the domesticated Alcicamelops species in Kadan, islands of the Free States. These animals are smaller than their mainland species, descended specifically from the now extinct Kudgerith species of Troqatul, which migrated to the region during the low sea levels 1.5 million years ago. While lions and leopards sometimes pose a threat in the highlands of the Free States, most have been hunted to extinction by the Chimeran residents of the islands in the past 500,000 years, meaning that these Troqatul have very little to fear from predators. This is theorized to be why this species, Alcicamelops Troqatul, have a temperament suitable for domestication, unlike its more skittish and aggressive mainland cousins. Domesticated Troqatul are used for labor, travel, and war. While a horse is faster, cattle more powerful, and camels superior in endurance, meaning most cavalry prefer these species, the agility of Troqatul is not a trait to be overlooked. Scouts in a forested environment always prefer a Troqatul, where they maintain respectable speeds off-road and through cover. They also excel in many cavalry charges, able to navigate through fortifications and obstacles that would slow less maneuverable mounts. Many military engagements have been won using Troqatul, and the Free States and Qajar both hold them in high regard. While the Picardian Anamotu is far too aggressive for domestication, the Picardians do prize the Troqatul, often breeding their native animals with domesticates from the Free States to make the Konamotu, a powerful war beast. Due to needing some horsetail and fern in their diet and having to adapt to these plants over their tenure in Kaimere, Troqatul meat is mildly toxic, and because even the hereditary magic of Chimerans means they cannot be consumed in great quantities, Troqatul are much less popular than cattle, horses, and donkeys, since these beasts just need grass and can thrive on the same soils that people need for most of our agriculture. However, in places like Picardia, where grass and agricultural soil is not particularly abundant, Troqatul make a much more practical domesticate. Cheers to Amelia for sponsoring this episode. Macrauchenia and other Litopterns are fascinating animals, and it was exciting to finally give them a much-deserved showcase. They've been part of Kaimere for almost 2 decades thanks to my enjoyment of them and walking with beasts, with some of my earliest Chimeran mounts being the Troqatul, but I haven't dived into them much or given them quality illustrations until now. The nasal openings are retracted far back in the skull, which is very weird even aside from the nasal openings. This led many early reconstructions of Litopterns, showing them with a trunk. However, a study in 2018 suggested osteological correlates did not match up with trunked animals like tapir and elephants, instead arguing for a closer resemblance to a moose, which has since become the paleoart standard. The moose comparison does seem quite apt when one looks at the two skulls side by side. There have been argued against by South American pictographs that appear to show camel-like animals with a trunk, although that's hardly irrefutable proof, and could well be a tapir. I decided to illustrate the Troqatul with a moose-like nasal opening, which is what a lot more modern paleo artists do. Seems more in line with the current evidence, although I embellished with a large resonating chamber. Even if their trunk or another analogous structure ends up being favored down the road, unlikely, I'll probably stick with this design. After all, they have been in Kaimere for 6 million years. I do like to keep my designs up to date with current evidence, which is why I went with the reconstructions you've seen throughout this episode. Thanks again to Amelia, and I'll see you next week for our look at the biotic, largest rodent in Kaimere. Until then, stay fantastic, everyone. Cheers, folks!